COVID. I mean, we have had record cases and hospitalizations still. What should be done about it, and what role should the legislature play? I mean, they are going to start meeting, even though it's a fiscal session, late next month. Any thoughts on that?
Well, specifically, I think the Supreme Court was correct in their decision. I don't believe that the mandates should have been handed down from the federal government. In fact, and I've been very open about this, the first step in the scientific method is observation. And the federal government and the CDC neglected to observe people who have natural immunity, which in the beginning, the CDC said that the natural immunity would not be long-term, and they were not correct about that. And they've since changed that. And hey, I'll give it to them. You know, this was new. Nobody had a crystal ball. But there were other people who did see the benefits of natural immunity, and they were being left out of the conversation because the first thing that they would say from a federal standpoint is, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and this is vaccinated versus unvaccinated with no observation of natural immunity whatsoever. And they would continue to say this is scientific, but you can't come to a scientific conclusion without correct observation. And so I think it's important, as this thing evolves, I think natural immunity has become more and more part of the conversation as we move forward. And I think the CDC has recognized that. I think the federal government is the last one to the table that's willing to do that. And I think, hey, in politics, sometimes people do not want to admit when they're wrong. And so, you know, I think it's important for people, the vaccine is important for people who are 65 and over, should they choose to get it. Some people have had Omicron who are not vaccinated, and they got through it. Now they'll enjoy immunity to that as well. But the greatest immunity that's enjoyed right now is the immunity to the drug companies. They are immune from any kind of backlash whatsoever, even though this started under the Trump administration. You know, that's kind of where this thing is headed. And I'm glad that natural immunity is becoming a bigger part of the conversation now, and it's not being neglected. And I don't know if it was neglected for nefarious purposes or political points or not, but now we're finally at the table. And I think that's an important thing. And a lot of people in this district feel strongly about that. They don't want businesses shut down. Now, if a business wants to require a patron to wear a mask when they come in, that is fine. That is that small business's decision to make. I think what happens when that decision is made is the free market will determine if that is going to be something that hurts that business or it could cause more business. There are some people who won't shop in businesses if they can't wear a mask or if they're required to wear a mask. So the greatest part of our economy is the free market, and that's a huge part of capitalism. And I think that's what needs to play out. Small businesses are terrified that if we have another variant, that business is going to shut down. But I think what we've seen in states that have remained open, they have had better success, and we've seen a lot more natural immunity in those states. And that is not to neglect at all the devastation that we've seen from this. I think sometimes people, when they hear about people being supportive of natural immunity, they think that individuals who promote that are saying, so what, who cares if somebody gets ill or somebody dies? What we're looking at in that conversation is a history of vaccinations and how they work and how they operate. This is probably the first vaccine in the history of the world that it's its effectiveness or lack thereof in some instances is blamed on people who didn't take it. And I think the people in our district are frustrated by that. And there's really people are looked down on to believe in natural immunity and believing that, I had COVID. I had a very bad case of COVID in December before they even rolled out the vaccine. Probably should have gone to the hospital, but I didn't. And I had another bout with this Omicron. And so I know I test for antibodies, the T and B cell antibodies, pretty regularly, just because I want to be careful. And I've also changed my health in the past 6 months to avoid it. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people can do. But anyway, that's my stance on it. I think small business wants to stay open. They don't want the government, whether it's state through executive orders, they do not want to be shut down in that manner. And if we do need to shut down, the business owners can make that decision. And if people are afraid to get out and shop, then they won't shop. So I'm for freedom, and I believe that that's what small businesses and the people in our district want to enjoy.
Ask that question because it is so looming. I asked that question first because it is such a big issue. But let's talk the bread and butter issue. Why you for state senator instead of your opponent?
Well, let me first say this. We have enjoyed a really good, clean race all the way from the first runoff. I was appreciative of all of my opponents, and the first thing I did after that first election was actually reached out to Lisa Parsh to congratulate her. And I know you're not supposed to say your opponent's name, but I think that's old time politics, and I don't mind saying Lisa's name. I consider her an acquaintance. I met her the other day in person for the first time, and seemed like a great individual. I don't want to talk disparaging about anyone, but I will say this: in this race, I think our national situation, the economic engine of this country, has suffered because of the leadership of this administration. We have seen some things happen in our economy that's caused great inflation. We have a labor shortage. And we're a little insulated from those things here in Northwest Arkansas compared to most areas. But I think people are wanting people in government that have some kind of business background, that understand the economy. I was a small business owner. I owned the last company that I owned, at least that I sold. We had owned that. We had taken a struggling small business and in 4 years turned it into one of the fastest growing businesses in that industry in the entire country. And it's because I applied the free market principles and capitalism to that. And that's what has driven this country, is capitalism. And I think people want people in government who understand the economy, because here's what happens. When you have someone who doesn't understand the economy, which is exactly what's happening in Washington right now, you end up in a disaster like we're seeing with inflation right now. Inflation is a tax that is a respecter of no person. It doesn't matter if you're the wealthiest person in Senate District number 7, or you are at the very bottom level of poverty in this district. When you go to the grocery store, you will pay that inflation tax. It doesn't matter who you are. There's other taxes in our state that we adjust based on income. There's other ways to help people who have lower income levels to avoid certain taxes. You can't do that with inflation. When you pay for gas, it doesn't matter what your income level is. And that is a direct result of people being involved in making decisions for our country, for our state, and even locally, who don't understand economics. I think people are desperate for people who are successful in business to get involved in politics for the very reason that we're struggling right now as a country. The other thing I think, and I said this early on, is people want problem solvers involved in government. Politicians or people who jump into politics, they either create problems, and let's just be real honest, a lot of politicians create problems, unnecessary problems, And then you have problem solvers. At the announcement event that I had, Mayor Sprouse, who's been a tremendous mayor for the city of Springdale, we've seen great success under his leadership. He and former Senator Lance Eads both shared the same sentiment that one of the great qualities about Colby is that when there's an issue or when a problem arises, he'll sit down, he'll process that whole issue and find the best solution. He'll consult with other people, but he will find a solution to that problem. And I think those who have worked with me here in local government, I was on the city council for 4 years, and I've been the chief of staff, which was a newly created position. When I came on board, I think the people around me have recognized that about me. And I think they need someone with some experience heading into this fiscal session. I think they want someone who it's not going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be some learning curve, but I think they want somebody who can step in and make decisions and solve problems. And I think those are probably the reasons that best suit me, and I think the voters, to go into the Senate and be the candidate that goes to Little Rock.
You mentioned the learning curve. Oh, you're running to fill an unexpired term. The election day is February the 8th, and the legislature is going to go into fiscal session on February the 22nd. So yeah, you're going to be, whoever wins this race is going to be, let's say, have quite a graduation ceremony. Yeah, it's almost like a surprise party. Not only is it a session, but it's going to be a fiscal session, which is on the timeline and deals with complex budget matters. You ready for this?
That is probably, if you were to ask somebody on the council or the mayor, they would probably say this is Colby's bread and butter, or this is his bailiwick, as the mayor likes to say. This is one of the things that he has really thrown me into. One of the reasons he selected me to serve in this position was because I had a good understanding of the budget. And I've always said, you really can't serve well in government if you don't understand the money. And I think my small business experience helped me in understanding the city's budget. Now, I will say this, government budgets are a lot different than a small business budget, but business principles are always the same. There's precepts and the principles that it doesn't matter what the entity is, they're always going to be true. But the budget is one of the things that the mayor has let me really handle. In fact, this year, and Lorinda will tell you this was the shortest budget meeting that we had this year. We finished from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m. instead of extending it for days and days and days. We had a great surplus. We've made changes. When I was on the council, we made some changes that I think led to those surpluses to end up in our general fund. And I'll give you an example of that. Whenever I was on the council, we used to have what we call a CIP fund. And a percentage of the money would go directly into that CIP fund, and we would budget traditionally to have about $4 million in that CIP fund. And then what would happen is in January, the council would see, hey, we got $4 million in here. What do we want to spend it on? And anything that was brought forward usually got approval because there was so much money sitting in that one account. We said, let's change that. And so my proposal, which ended up being picked up by Jeff Watson, and he agreed with it, and we got everybody else on board, was let's budget that monthly. So the first month we don't start out with $4 million, if we start out with so many hundreds of thousands of dollars. That will help us say no to some things that aren't necessary. And the greatest thing that I think you have to ask anytime you're dealing with money in government is this a need or is this a want? And a lot of times we see a lot of wants that get funded. And that's going to be the trick, I think, in this fiscal session. We've got a surplus in the state budget. We've seen a surplus there, and they just did tax breaks. And I think the danger right now in this fiscal session is you're going to have a lot of places, a lot of entities come and say, hey, we just want a small portion of that surplus that you got sitting over there. I've seen this happen even on the local level. That's the danger. Once you start seeing success financially is you start finding ways to spend that money and it just goes right out the window. And that's the danger in government. And that's how you start funding things. I don't know if you've ever seen Rand Paul's list of things that we waste the most money on in federal spending. I mean, we're spending money on studying beetles in Madagascar on a federal level. It's like, how did we get that much surplus that we ended up studying a beetle on the other side of the globe right now? And that's what happens even on state and local level. We get these small projects and they just eat away at your surplus. And that's going to be the trick, I think. There's two ways to add to your bottom line. You can either increase your revenue or you can cut your spending. We don't want to raise taxes. We can raise revenue without raising taxes, but we definitely don't want to start sending more money out the window and spending more. We need to fund the necessary entities and causes in our state that are important, and those will come to the table, but this is not the time to start spending money on unnecessary things just because we have a surplus. So that's probably the biggest thing I'm going to be looking for.
Another unique feature of this race, you're running to fill the unexpired term of a Senate district that's boundaries has been changed. You know, it's not going to have Elkins and Goshen in it anymore. The next,
right.
Such as that. Are you interested in running for, if successful, would you be interested in running for re-election in that different district? I mean, it's still got the core of Springdale in it, of course.
Yeah. My heart has been in Springdale since 2016. There's always interest in those opportunities, but I'll be really honest with you. I'm a man of faith, and my faith is important to me. And I have told God what I was going to do in my life, and that has never worked out. I never thought I would own a funeral home, but that's what happened. I never thought I would be on a city council. That's what happened. I never thought I'd be the chief of staff, and I never thought I'd be running for the state legislature, because if people who know me the best know that I've always said I would never run to be in office in Little Rock. It's just never been something that I wanted to do. This is something that I felt I needed to do. In fact, there was a list of people I was supporting to run for this seat, and I was encouraging them to run. And then whenever I saw nobody wanting to put their name on the line, I just felt convicted that I needed to do this. And I talked to my wife and my kids about it. And I said, Dad's going to have to be away for a few weeks here in February and for some other committee meetings in this fiscal session. And I have always coached my children in their sports. We're a very close family. We do everything together, and it is a huge time commitment. And I don't know what that crystal ball looks like. There's always interest in doing those things. But as I said before, I've ended up doing things I never thought I would want to do. And so I'm going to run for this, and then I'm going to get my feet wet. And I don't have very much time to make a decision. I'm open to that. But we'll make that final decision probably within the last day or maybe 48 hours before the deadline to file. So we're going to wait a little bit.
Okay. You won the nomination in a runoff. And one of your opponent's issues, he had several, prison reform, such as that, but one thing specific to this region, he said that we need a plan B, so to speak, on the landfill, that the landfill that's being used now for this entire Northwest Arkansas corner region isn't going to last forever. That's something we need to look at. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, here's what I would caution about that. And look, Steve and I are friends. He's a good man. We just have difference of opinion on some things. That if another landfill comes in, I promise you don't want it ran by the government. We are not the solution to a landfill. That is a private sector. That is something that Waste Management or another company could even come in and do. And I think we would, just like with any business, the Chamber of Commerce can get involved in those things. There's things that we can do as a city, especially Tawnytown, since it's out in Tawnytown. But even if something were to happen in Springdale or a surrounding area, the local government would need to get involved, and even the state level, to let the private sector find a solution. Private sector will find a solution 10 out of 10 times better than government. And it's like Ronald Reagan said, anytime the government shows up and says, hey, I'm here to help, you need to run the other way. So we need to find an opportunity for the private sector to find the solution to that. The government does not need to do that.
Okay. You had mentioned, the sacrifice of going to sessions. I mean, they've got the fiscal session coming up, then the regular session, and the committee meetings and stuff such as that are usually 200 miles away from here.
That's right.
There's a proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot that would allow the legislature to call itself into special session. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting. I think the legislature should have that opportunity, but here's my problem with this, and I've been open about this. I think when you do that and you open up the legislature to have meetings, you could have it 365 days a year. But here's the problem that you have. What that would do is only allow independently wealthy people to participate in the state legislature, and I do not like that at all. I want to follow the schedule of sessions as closely as we can so that someone who maybe works for an employer that's open to them being in Little Rock, they may only make $25,000 a year, $40,000 a year, whatever it may be. It opens it up to anybody serving in the state legislature. And I do not want to be in a situation where only independently wealthy people can go to Little Rock and speak on behalf of everyone else. I don't think that's a very good dynamic. One of the things people that know me the most know this about me. I'm more about fairness than anything else. That's one of the reasons I ran for this office, because I felt like there was people who at one point, if I decide not to run again, or if I serve 1 or 2 terms and don't run again, there was other people who weren't eligible to run for this seat because they were currently elected. And one of the reasons I ran for this is to say, look, if this is a short term, if it does turn into short term, I want the people of Springdale, Elkins, Goshen, Tawnytown to be able to select the person that they want in a primary that's open to everybody. And that was not the case this time. And the same thing goes for this option of the legislature opening up all these sessions. It's going to put people who might want to serve that aren't wealthy at a disadvantage to serving in the state legislature, and I do not like that.
Okay, I do want to just a bit of explanation. Because it's a special election, if somebody was already holding an office, they couldn't run for it. But for instance, if it was a regular election, they could have said, okay, I'm going to run for it because I wouldn't take office until after the end of my term. Just
That's right.
Quick explanation there. In fairness, I ought to go ahead and mention the other 2 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. One of them, if you have any strong opinions on either of them, go ahead. One would propose a 60% threshold instead of a regular majority for proposed voter-initiated constitutional amendments and initiated acts. And the other one is a freedom of religion amendment, basically saying the government shall not impede anybody in the free practice of their religion. In fairness, any thoughts on those?
Well, anytime there's a majority in the state legislature, you got to be careful because the pendulum swings. I mean, just like on the national level, they're talking about, in the Senate especially, being able to block or not block, but the filibuster. You have to be so careful on those things. I don't know that I have as strong of an opinion as 60% over majority, but I think that's a protective measure. I would not mind 60%. I think that's probably a safeguard there. I think 50% on those type of issues, you're going to end up changing things every other election. So I don't know that I have the strongest opinion on that. Religious liberty is probably a little more important to me right now. I do not want the government impeding on people's religious rights. I think I think whenever you take that concept combined with this pandemic, it put the government in certain situations where they were trying to regulate things in ways that people felt like it was impeding on their religious rights. And I agree with that. I don't think it's right for the government to be able to regulate that. So um, I think there's other elements that'll get attached to that with the the religious freedoms. I know there's people running for other offices that are going to push some things. It's supposed to be a fiscal session, but it's probably not going to just be a fiscal session. We're probably going
to. I'm going to interrupt you to say it never has been in the past. I don't see why they're going to do it now.
Yeah, it'll be a fiscal smorgasbord session, but yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think the religious liberties is a big thing, and people felt like they were being under attack. Their liberties were being under attack, and the process matters. I know people felt like with the pandemic, this is different, so we have the opportunity to do this and do that. And I think the majority of the people in this district were particularly upset when it came to religious freedom during the pandemic. So a lot of churches still, I was at church Sunday and the staff was wearing masks. So it's not that just because, we don't have a mask mandate church services that church people aren't going to wear a mask, or churches can require that for their own congregations. What people are tired of is the government treating people like children all the time and talking down to them. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. And we've seen, as I talked about with COVID, the CDC has changed their stance on several things. And like I said, they didn't have a crystal ball. They didn't know what was going to happen or what immunity was going to look like. But they did certain things, or we saw certain things implemented even on a state level that impeded those religious liberties. And so I can understand that, and that's something that's important to me as well.
Okay. Well, Colby, that's all the questions I have. Skip anything that you thought was important?
I don't think so. I think we covered just about everything.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thanks for your time, guys.